The white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. In this political football game, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode from the Black Radicals. In today's episode, we will be talking to Esra Özyürek about her book, Subcontractors of Guilt, Holocaust Memory, and Muslim Belonging in Post-War Germany. Professor Özyürek is the Sultan Qaboos Professor of Abrahamic Religions and Shared Value at Cambridge. In our conversation today, we try to make sense of German guilt, memory culture, the central role of a certain bastardized version of anti-Semitism to state ideology, and who is Ahmad Mansour, and what do people like him represent. Importantly, for us today, we see how these concepts are informed by anti-Muslim racism and the image Germany has of itself. If you like today's conversation, please follow us for more, subscribe, and like. We will be continuing our reading groups. If you would like to be involved, you can follow us on Instagram. Our handle is black_radicals. Alternatively, you can also email us at blackradicalsgermany@gmail.com. With that, enjoy today's conversation. And the reason why I'm talking to you, or the reason why I wanted to reach out, Professor, is because honestly, when I came to Germany, we came to Germany like 2 years ago. And so there was this weird sort of schism where Germany was always seen as like this country that sort of was on the forefront of like reparations, and like it like answered for like its crimes, and it's seen in this light. And then when you come, especially for me as a Black Muslim, when you come to Germany, you sort of you immediately find out that this is really not just selective, but it's kind of weird. And I think your book, Subcontractors of Guilt, was such a fascinating book to read just to make sense of this. So it's really, really cool to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think, what you're talking about has been the experience of a lot of us coming to Germany from the third world, from more, progressive leftist circles. I have seen it from, a lot of people, from Russians, people from Asia, so many of us came of age learning about German Holocaust memory culture. I think many of us wanted to take it as a model to deal with injustice in our countries. And then we wanted to point it to, like people who are involved in politics in our countries. Look, there is another way you can take accountability for the past crimes, and then dealing with the past will make us more democratic. So there is a different approach, right? So we were all impressed by that. And then those of us who came to Germany and saw that it is different. But I also want to say this difference, and then using the Holocaust memory in order to exclude another group, in order to, be racist, using the memory of racism to be racist for another group, is also a new thing. Like until 2000s, German memory culture was more inward oriented. They were not interested in Muslims at all. So it is a story of the last 20, 25 years. But, before jumping to Germany, we can again maybe prioritize our own experiences, so then it became now really difficult to use the German experience as a model. So everyone is aware that it is being used again to, marginalize another group. So we cannot even point to it. But at the same time, like I guess many of us still believe in the spirit of it. The countries, groups, individuals need to be accountable for their past crimes. The fact that German experience went the wrong way doesn't mean that the original intention was wrong.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's the thing that you said about using something that happened in the past that was racist and led to the destruction of the European Jew, using that for racism, and that this is a relatively new phenomena. Can you maybe a little bit historicize it for us? Why did it happen in the 2000s? Why didn't it happen before? And the difference between internal and maybe state-sponsored or external. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how I understand it is that just like any social phenomena, I guess, the German memory culture also has its history. It has not always been like that, right? Like right after the war, there was a quiet period until, let's say, the 1968 movement. And then in 1968, the youth activists took this as an important issue. And then they wanted to come to terms with their parents, and then they saw them as in the right place in the history as opposed to their parents. So they confronted their own parents' involvement in the Nazi times. But at the same time, already from get-go, actually, there was something strange about that movement too. They differentiated as good Jews and bad Jews, and then they also did some anti-Semitic crimes that themselves, and then they saw themselves as the good Germans. So it was already anachronistic. So that is one thing that has continued, I would say. Like the German memory culture has often been anachronistic. So then in the 1980s and 1990s, I would say, was the height of the German memory culture, like the thing probably like we admire that really attracted the attention of the rest of the world who are progressive, who are for justice, who are for equality. And at that time, it was more community based, it was more grassroots. It was like people figuring out what has happened in their families. People are trying to figure out what happened in their neighborhoods. I don't know, like initiatives like Stolpersteine, or artists were making these negative artwork, but it was not state imposed. Like people are discovering what had happened. Um, when things have changed is that when Germanies have unified, then the German memory culture became, as it was understood in West Germany, became the state ideology. So I would say that is when the problems have started. And then there's also the East German understanding. East Germans had a different approach to um, memory of what had happened. So they were, also quite critical. And actually, when we look at the numbers, more people were punished for taking part in the Holocaust in East Germany than in West Germany. But they have not put Jews, crimes against Jews, at the center. They had seen it more as a factor of capitalism, which obviously played an important role. A big mistake, mm, I don't know, yeah, a big mistake, let's say, East Germany has done, has been to argue that all bad Germans were in West Germany. Like West
Mm.
Germans have caused it. East Germans, because they're socialists, they are by definition good. So that is like a one major faulty aspect in East German memory culture. And then the West German memory culture has kind of emphasized individual feelings, also culture. Like, how is it that what is wrong with the German culture? What is wrong with the German family? So they have seen it more as an individual, like how people are prone to individually following collective orders, how they have been lacking empathy, things like that. There, they have not seen the connection of the Holocaust to capitalism to militarism to state to borders, right? Like Holocaust didn't happen because people were not empathetic or people had these absent fathers, right? That there was too much individualization. So when the Germanies united, this West German model became dominant, and then it became a state ideology. Then we have the memorial in Berlin, reparations to people who have been used as slave labor, and after that, many Germans started to feel like, okay, now we have done enough. Like, can we now be a normal, well-respected member of the family of nations? So at the time when they did research with people about what shall we do, where shall we go, so people have said two things. They both said, we have done enough. Isn't it enough? We spent all that money. We have this like big memorial at the center of our city that always reminds us, so now it should be in a way enough. And at the same time, they said, but we should also do more, so like they had this conflicting thing. We should do more to remember. So then my argument is that Muslims came into the stage at the right time for them. Also there were other developments too. I don't know, 9/11 had happened, and then the second Intifada had happened. So there were lots of protests in European streets. People were burning Israeli flags. And then, Germans got surprised. Wow, why are Israeli flags being burning in our street? So then it became quite convenient for Germans to see themselves as having learned from these experiences, having overcome their anti-Semitism, having come to a good place, and that they became also the world experts of recognizing anti-Semitism. So then they turned to Muslims. Okay, now we can educate you. Now we can teach you how to not become anti-Semites, just like we are. So more, I would say, the liberal German nationalism. Then they said, you are just behind us, and we will help you learn from our experiences, but then always staying behind. Organized for Muslims that I have looked in my book have came into being. But over time, as right-wing movements became stronger, and then how Holocaust memory ironically became, also philo-Semitism and being pro-Israel became a more right-wing idea, then Muslims became just as totally outside of it. Now they were no longer seen as even trainable, educatable. Then they were just seen as, like they are the enemies of these people that we killed before. Now we want to protect now. And then we see as our allies, as, the right-wing government in Israel is an ally of the right-wing movements in Germany. Yeah, so that is how I understand the history of the evolution of Holocaust memory culture.
That's so interesting because I think the part about you connecting it to like the state ideology after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, basically. Um, and I think when it comes to like state ideology, it has like such a strong resonance. I mean, even if you look into America, for example, the founding fathers and like all these or like with the Magna Carta in like Britain or England or whatever, or the Parliament. And so like state ideologies tend to need to last. And I'm just wondering, like, until when, because like reparations, obviously, to the destruction of the European Jew, for example, it seems as if, remember, if you attach your state ideology to that, it seems like it's an ongoing process. You're always simultaneously paying for the destruction of for the crimes of the Holocaust, but also simultaneously always one step ahead of everyone else because you've combated how because everyone because you've basically paid for the anti-Semitism. So this schism, how do they mitigate this? I don't know, politically or socially or culturally?
The problem is leaving this to the state, because you said when states take it over. So that is the problem, because this is like a radical project. It has to be grassroots. It has to be, sort of anarchist. It has to always renew itself to understanding how racism works and how racism had worked. And resistance towards it has to come from people. You cannot give anti-racist work to the state. I mean, obviously, states can support it, or as individuals, we can continuously challenge the state as long as it exists, so that we can challenge it to change itself. But when the state itself take on the project of anti-racism, I feel like it doesn't work, because at the end, the state protects its own interests, which is this hierarchical organization, which, has to prioritize interests of some groups against others. And then the reparations were also paid to another state, again, to the state of Israel. Like the Holocaust was not about the state of Israel, but was about Jews, so then the power of doing what to do with the reparations was also given to another state, so I think that is also part of the problem, like then it became like this stately thing, and then states do what states always do. Okay, like one was, let's say, a fascist state, and then later it wasn't a fascist state, but at the same time, from the radical ideology that we look at the world, states are always states, that they have common futures. And then how they have always seen themselves ahead is also, that is the nature of white racism, right? Like always seeing themselves as better. So then this racist idea and the memory of it then became another way of, yeah, conceptualizing white supremacy. And then also there is a Christian element to it too, right? Like the person sins, and then after their sin, they become better. So in a way, then the people who have not sinned, then they cannot become better. So like learning from the Holocaust made Germans better. Then what are the people who have not committed that sin are going to do? How are they going to then walk on that path towards democratization? So at first they were just totally left behind until, 2000s. They were like, oh, you're irrelevant to this story. This is not your path towards democracy. But then after 2000s, then they became like, oh, now you're not part of it. Then it became like, no, you're even worse. Actually, you have committed this too, like as Arabs, or now you are committing anti-Semitism, but you're also not admitting to it. And then you're never going to be, come to the level of this democratic country. So in a way, there's like kind of no way out of it. Like once you're guilty, like you cannot improve because you haven't committed the sin. And then second, you cannot, what is the word? You cannot redeem yourself.
Yeah. I think this was part of the book that I found so fascinating and enlightening when like exactly what you said about like since we've committed the sin, and you haven't committed the sin, but you're heading towards committing the sin, so we can guide you not to commit, it's so like a schizophrenic. Um, but speaking of that, I'd like to get right into the book and to link it to what you just said. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the programs, like there's programs. One of the ones that you mentioned is called Hero or Heroes.
Right,
And
right.
can you tell us a bit about like how this program sort of was supposed to like, what the program is and what was its purpose and why was it directed towards racialized people or Muslims or Turks?
I mean, I'll tell you about this program and then some others, but at the same time, the era of these programs have also passed. Because in 2010s, let's say, up till then, there was a belief, or some people who call themselves progressives, progressive white people, liberals, let's say, white people, believe that Muslims can be educated. as long as they walk just few steps behind us, as long as they allow us to lead them, we can change them, so that, they'll remain whatever brown, but we can at least change the inside of them. We can change their hearts, and then they can be part of us. Right now, I would say that understanding, which I was critical, and then which, like, many of us were critical, doesn't even exist. Now, this conservative government doesn't even want to spend money on Muslims to change them. Now, the understanding is that Muslims are unchangeable. We cannot, like, we're not even going to bother spending money changing them. So now we're going to, if we can, send them away. So like that liberalism that we were critical has also died, you know?
Oh,
So maybe remnants of it will be there. Maybe if there's another social democrat government comes, these things maybe, come alive again. But at the moment, it looks like, yeah, that liberalism we were critical of has died. And then one feels almost nostalgic about a time when they thought it was at least worth spending money on Muslims. So those programs were quite problematic, let's say, because they had the idea that Muslims are different, they have a different culture. And I likened it to the way Americans have seen Germans, that after the war, Americans have thought German family structure is problematic. Germans have these absent and authoritative fathers, which make German sons very obedient. Also, there were ideas that they were sexually oppressed Germans. That is why they turned towards violence and they became Nazis. All of these are kind of constructs. And then it is also at the time it was written as so because, Germans were enemies, but at the same time they were white. And then a lot of people in Germany, in the US who were in power were also Germans. So they were like, how are we going to negotiate these white people having turned in a way that turned out to be our enemies? So then they said, okay, it is their culture, and then we can help them change their culture. We can, have these programs. We can change their schools. We'll make sure that they don't wear uniforms at schools. We'll make sure that, there's more freedoms. We'll make sure that the families are more democratic, whatnot, and they'll change and they'll become like us, the Americans. Um, and I feel like similar arguments were made about Muslim families are authoritarian, Muslim fathers are too powerful and absent at the same time. There is sexual oppression in Muslim families. So let's and then these are the characteristics that produce anti-Semitism. So let's make sure that there's sexual freedom, that people rebel against their fathers, and in a way, in 1960s, Germans rebelled against their parents. They found it really important. They thought if we rebel against our parents, who were Nazis, we're now going to be free and democratic. So in a way, they tried to apply similar strategies towards Muslims because they have seen Muslims as their own past. But these programs were super problematic because Muslim families are not necessarily like that. It is not that all fathers are absent, all fathers are sexist. It's not that, they're all sexually oppressed, they're all anti-gay, like, so in these programs, they like built on the stereotype of these Muslim families. When I worked with the youth who are part of these programs, they would say, oh, we're not like that. There would be a lot of discussion about boys controlling their sisters, which happens, of course. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it became this Muslim sexism, different from German sexism. I mean, in Germany, plenty of women are controlled by men. There is like plenty of femicide. But then this idea of sisters being controlled is not as often. So it was seen as this like culturally specific Muslim misogyny. And then there were a lot of arguments about how if we free our sisters, if boys free their sisters, then actually it will be sexual liberation because then we can date each other's sisters. And then, once we are not sexually frustrated, then we will not be violent and we are not going to be anti-Semitic. So it is like quite, I mean, like when you understand the logic, it makes sense. But then, it is yeah, quite peculiar. And then when I was talking to boys, is it like that? Do you, I don't know, beat your sisters up? Do you not let them out? And then they would say, oh, we are not like that in our families, but still we are going to say that so others do not do it. So they were making these theaters, they were going to schools and telling about these things, which are things they don't practice or it is not part of their lives. And also another finding is that Turkish or Arab young people learn that their culture is so, not from their families, but from these discourses out there, right? Like when you're in diaspora, you don't always know what your culture is. You're trying to discover it. And then there are people who tell you, or that young people tell, like young boys tell each other, oh, you're a Turkish boy. In order to be a proper Turkish boy, you really need to make sure that your sister doesn't go outside. So these are things that they have learned and started to practice more in Germany. I'm not going to say such an idea doesn't exist at all in Turkey. It does, but the way in which it has been put to practice is like this, like putting culture as if turning into a folklore that people learn from each other. So in a way, these programs were helping stereotypes to be stronger. And another thing that I found really, really interesting and confusing is that like these programs are made in the name of integration, but they were separating these people. Like then why are you setting up these separate, like only Turkish and Arab boys groups fighting sexism? If this is a factor of German society, then why are you turning them into these cultural essential groups, even if it is not so? They go to German schools, like preventing in a way their integration. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So these were the problematic ways that I have noticed.
I think that's so interesting, especially when you say, for example, culture sort of turns into folklore and how this plays in like um, sort of like self-perpetuates itself.
Yes.
Um, and I'm wondering if, you know, when people came to do this, or like when, for example, like in the book, I think you mentioned a couple of funders of like these programs, and you have like, for example, the Green Party funding some, the Social Democrats funding some, and various groups. And I'm wondering when they fund these programs, what's their motivation? Like, do they actually believe that there is sort of an essential patriarchal character in Arab or Turkish people? Is it like for, a state image that something that we talked about earlier about like, fighting anti-Semitism? Is it a mixture of both? Is it more than that? Or what's your findings?
Definitely, definitely. And then it is also seen as a bundle, like anti-Semitism, misogyny, homophobia. So they are seen as a bundle. And these are all the things that Germans used to suffer. And now Germans healed those characteristics, and now Muslims are suffering. And in a way, focusing on Muslims makes it look like Germans are not suffering those. For example, like in March 8th, right, is the International Women's Day. So, you look at the newspapers, or it used to be more so, that it will all be about Muslim sexism. So that makes it as if there is no white German sexism. or, like when you focus on Muslim anti-Semitism, it makes it as if it's a Muslim problem, not a German problem, even though we know that, 90% of anti-Semitic crimes are, committed by Germans. And similar, there's like plenty of sexism, plenty of femicide committed by white Germans. Um, yeah, so the aim, so everyone believes that Muslims have a problem of patriarchy, anti-Semitism. I think that is established. So the liberal groups, their difference is that they believe that this can be healed. Like this can be, because it's a problem of culture, these people can be learned a better way. And then the difference of the right wing is that they believe they cannot change. These people are essentially like that. That
I
is what
think
makes a left in Germany.
you mentioned that, quote, the overwhelming majority of anti-Semitic hate crimes are committed by right-leaning white Germans, a population also responsible for a disproportionately large number of hate crimes targeting refugees, Muslim Germans, social workers who work with refugees, and politicians who defend the rights of refugees. The biggest threat to German democracy today seems to lie not in Muslim background Germans and refugees, but in the two-pronged anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim racism of the right-wing Germans. And end quote. And which is basically what you just said now. And I wanted to say, like, the statistics just don't add up. You know what I mean? Like, you have a caricature basically of like, okay, Muslims are this, and anti-Semitism is, disproportionately represented by Muslims and patriarchy and so on and so forth. The statistics showed like a completely different topic, a completely different picture. And, it's worth noting that a couple of years ago, one of these right-leaning groups tried to actually overthrow the Bundestag. Completely contradictory sets of images. Why does this one, like the Muslim being a patriarch, why does it still have roots in it? Like, what's going on there?
I guess it serves a function. It, helps the idea of continuing to believe that there is a democratic um, white German society. And yeah, you know, of course, now the statistics may change because now making statements against anti-Israel are also being coded as anti-Semitic. So earlier it wouldn't be, there are training programs for police to recognize anti-Israel actions as anti-Semitic. So then those statistics will change. When I wrote those articles, then I received a lot of reaction against it. In every talk that I have given, there would be people saying, "Oh, it is not true. There is also a lot of anti-Muslim, you know, so there's a lot of Muslim anti-Semitism, but we don't report about these, so that then then there will be a lot of backlash against Muslims." And I would say it doesn't work like that. You cannot have secret research. You cannot have secret access to police records. There's no police records that don't tell us what is happening. So it was like this almost a campaign. Whenever I gave these talks, there would be people challenging it, but without backing it. So now the numbers have changed because they also realized that this mismatch in numbers. So now they're changing how anti-Semitic crimes are being categorized. So then there is this establishment that being anti-Israel is anti-Semitic. And as a result, so many liberal Jews, especially from the US and from Israel, are also accused of being anti-Semitic. So this became this new trend in the last, let's say, maybe not 10, but last 10 years. Just anyone, so then the focus has changed. So there is less focus on more, like vile, old-fashioned, let's say proper fascist, anti-Semitic, anti-Jew hatred, but then it had turned all against critiquing of Israel. When Angela Merkel had said this is our reason of the state to exist, which already is a very anti-democratic thing, like for someone coming from Turkey, I don't know, also from other people coming from authoritarian countries. In those places, there is conversation about the reason of the state, which is completely independent from what people want. That is how you do anti-democratic actions. You imagine that a state is superior to the wants and interests of its population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really fascinating. I've never heard of conceptualized this way the reason for the state.
Mm.
Um, Ahmad Mansour, who is simultaneously portrayed as an authentic critic of Islam and also simultaneously a reformer or a reformist. Can you tell us why do who these people are, or maybe if we can concentrate on Ahmad Mansour, why do they get so much, visibility, and how do we make sense of these kinds of
Right.
representation?
Well, Ahmed Mansour is a type of a person that we have examples of in many contexts. So Ahmed Mansour phenomena is a project, like it has funders, it has its supporters. He serves a function. It is not his eliteness. It is not his brilliance. Like clearly he is smart and he knows how to go around. But you know, in all countries, there are these Muslims who criticize Muslimness, like to turn the phrase self-hating Jew, we can call self-hating Muslims. And then they get all these awards supported by right wing, so then they become the people who can who say things that white people would look bad if they said it, but they speak only to white people anyway. So yeah, Ahmed Mansour is one such project. So he serves a function in the right-wing German, mm, I don't know, establishment project. You need to look at who is funding these individuals, who are they talking to, who are giving them the awards, and exactly who is funding them. So like that is what matters. It's not like Ahmed Mansour doesn't come from a Muslim community in Germany. There are no Muslims who take him seriously. So like Ahmed Mansour does not represent Muslim voices. So there were others before, right? Seyran Ateş, Necla Kelek, Abdel Samed, so like these people, I mean, we have the same thing in the UK. We have the same thing in Netherlands. Who was her name in the Netherlands? This
Mhm. I think
Somalian
she's from,
woman.
yeah, from Somalia. Yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Ayan
Yeah.
Hirsi Ali, right? So she also did a very similar thing, talked about no, Muslims are inherently violent, like, and also these people always write their their life histories, and there's always questions about their life stories, and then it will always have this thing. If it is women, they will be coming from very oppressive families who, did violence against them, and then they come to Europe, and then they always marry a white man, and now they're totally liberated. And then other researchers look, and then they find that they made things up. Actually, they usually don't come from oppressive families. I don't know about the Ayaan Hirsi Ali, but like Necla Kelek, like we know that, for example, these people come from more liberal families. But anyway, so there's and then they write these novels, life stories. White people read them. They are given lots of awards, and then Muslims are embarrassed by these people, because, like, for example, Seyran Ateş is one of them. And then, or was it Necla Kelek? Now, I couldn't be sure, but they would write like, yeah, anyway, I don't want to get into details to reproduce them, but they tell really disgusting things about Turkish families, which are not true at all. Like, why would you write such derogatory things about families just in order for an audience. So if men write these things, they will always be coming from a fundamentalist background. And then, again, they come to Europe and then they're liberated and then they see that is the wrong path and then now they're different. So Ahmed Mansour makes the thing that he comes from a fundamentalist background. And I tried to look into it, like what fundamentalist background? So like how do we know? What was he? Like he says, oh, I once went to this mosque and the imam was fundamentalist. Like, really? So anyways, so whatever Ahmed Mansour's story is that there is a narrative structure um, to these stories that they also speak to a certain audience. So Ahmed Mansour is taken to be representing Muslims and then given all this funding. For example, in the one of the last rounds of funding fight against anti-Semitism. So he got massive amounts of money. Why is that money given to him? And then, I don't again exactly know all the details, but people were complaining that like it bypassed the um, uh, what is the word that these processes run? So
Okay.
people are awarded for being very critical of Muslim populations, and then it gives you a strong sense that that was the aim. So
Mhm.
they are not for true liberation of Muslims or equality or justice for Muslims.
Is the logical conclusion for this kind of discourse basically to say that Islam cannot be integrated, like inherently there's something wrong?
Exactly. Exactly. That is why I'm saying it serves as right-wing ideology, and then it is used by um, right-wing actors and heroes. Even though like I criticized heroes, Ahmed Mansour had worked for heroes at the beginning. Like even heroes totally distanced itself and then, like gave a statement, Ahmed Mansour is racist against Muslims, so we are not
Wow.
um, like they told me never talk again. Heroes, Ahmed Mansour as representing heroes, otherwise we'll, go to legal path because
Wow.
we have distanced ourselves. So like even an organization like Heroes said Ahmed Mansour is racist and totally distanced itself. Like I mean, he writes for white people. He serves the function of saying Muslims are like really bad. They're fundamentally different. You cannot do anything. You cannot educate them. The only thing you can do is you can either use complete force on them to forcefully assimilate them or send them back. That is, yeah, what he and then, but if there was no Ahmed Mansour, there would be someone just like Ahmed Mansour, because he serves a function.
We're now at a different epoch or a different moment than when you've written the book. And you said, for example, earlier that where once Muslims, there was investment going into these like programs, as critical as you were to these
Right.
programs. But today, this is absolutely like this. This is not the case at all. Can you talk to us a little bit about this and why this shift?
Right. Like, for example, in 1990s, there was a lot of emphasis on protecting Muslim women. There were lots of women's shelters for Muslim women, right? Like the war in Afghanistan was waged to save Muslim women. Now that era is gone, right? Like no one talks about saving Muslim women. It's not, look at what's happening in Afghanistan, like no one cares. And there is not, I'm sure, there are still women's shelters in Germany, and I'm sure you can go as a Muslim woman, but there is no campaign in opening Muslim women's shelters. So that era has gone. Another era came that was about disciplining Muslim men, you know, like emphasis, they're related, but still it was more like that. So there were more projects for men and yeah, and then figuring out what is wrong with them, maybe some emphasis on rehabilitating them. But now that is also gone, so now there will be now where is money is spent. It is more on controlling the borders, making sure that they don't come, and then finding ways how to send them back. So the idea of either protecting the women or as integrating the men. So those eras have passed. It is about trying to send them back. It is the same in the UK and again, same in Germany. So it is this kind of an era.
And it's
So yeah, like in a way, that kind of liberalism is dead now. It is
yeah.
just like this far right discourses, and each party is competing with the other about how far right they can go. I mean, there's also left is also in the rise, like I don't know, in the UK, like the center right and center left parties are becoming more and more irrelevant. So it will be about this right-wing reform and left-wing Greens, so there is support for Greens too, but it looks like reform is way more stronger. So same in Germany. So if like a truly left-wing party comes to power, then I don't know what will happen. But yeah, now is the time of the right, sadly, it looks like.
What do you think people should be thinking about in these dark times, and what do you see coming in the future? Because like you said, like the prospects is basically an AFD government here in Germany, and perhaps a reform government in the UK, and we don't know, it's a little bit further off. But what do you see happening in the future, especially when it comes to like racialization with migrants and so on and so forth? And what should we on the ground sort of be thinking about, working on, and so on and so forth?
I mean, I think what we can do right now is just support each other, mutual aid, know our neighbors, cook for each other, like I feel like relying on the state to deliver us an equal and just society has failed us. Like, of course, like part of me, of course, still wants, like state still holds a lot of the resources. So we, of course, should also do party politics and support, left-wing parties. But at the same time, you know, I think those things come from, creating context that we know each other, we help each other, we eat together. So that is kind of where I spend my energies now, cooking at a community kitchen, working hard in these mutual aid, because it happens through meeting people and, supporting each other when hard times come. This is how I think at the moment. And there is such a movement also. It looks, yeah, yeah, let's see. I mean, of course, like deep down, I'm pessimistic, but when it comes to where to put my energies, I think this is where I want to put it.
We saw what the state, relying on the state does, and what the state sort of, it can easily just, as liberal as it can get, they can also
Right.
just drop people off and stuff like this. And so yeah, we have each other.
Thank you so much for the work you do in Germany and elsewhere.
Thank you for coming on and for talking about this very, very important book, a very, very important work, and hopefully we can have you on sometime in the future.